Après by Scullymurphy. Chapter 2. The Chalet. It's a bit smaller than I thought. Ginny's strained voice drifted down from the staircase she was currently descending. Hermione stopped in the act of putting away groceries in the Alpine-themed cabinetry. What do you mean? Harry, who was coming through the door, festooned with duffel bags and luggage, stamped his feet to rid them of snow. Looks bloody huge to me. He looked up at the two-storied great room and its floor-to-ceiling windows. Ginny's face was a little pale as she hit the bottom of the stairs and wandered towards the kitchen. It's the bedrooms, she said, biting the inside of her cheek. There are only 4. Hermione slammed a jar of marmalade down so hard that Ginny winced. Did you fucking plan this? No, of course not. It must have been a mix-up. The lady at the management company only spoke French and my translation charms have never been great. I'm sorry. Hermione took deep breaths and turned back around, focusing on a little circle of white flowers on the cabinet door in front of her. Are there 2 beds at least? She said softly. No, there's only 1. Ginny was uncharacteristically subdued. Harry coughed in the background. Hermione's shoulders inched up to her ears. Just then, a cultured voice swore from the vicinity of the fireplace. Hermione looked over to see the green flash of the flue and Theo Knott stumbling gracefully out of it, brushing at his lapels. Daphne was close behind him. Bloody hell, that's a rough ride. Public flue. Yuck. Theo gave a delicate shudder. Right call to take the muggle instead, Potter. Harry nodded and rushed forward to help Theo with the bags he was pulling out of the flames behind him. My poor thing! Daphne patted Theo on the back and stepped around him. Hi, everyone. Well, this place is stunning. Isn't it? Ginny said weakly, going over to say hello. Hermione also greeted her friends, although she felt she was in sort of a fugue state. Luckily, she didn't have to say much, because the flue roared again and Blaise Zabini's unmistakable tones rang out. Hello, this is gorgeous, he cried. Babe, look! He yanked the hand he was holding, and Neville Longbottom careered through the flames, then pitched into a nearby chair. It's lovely, Neville gasped. Bags come through all right, Harry? Yeah, I've got them in the foyer. How's your portkey? Little sick-inducing, but otherwise fine. Is there any room for one more in this madhouse? An amused drawl sounded from the doorway, and Hermione spun around, her stomach doing a little swoop. He was in jeans, some sort of cable-knit jumper, and a peacoat that was so beautifully cut it made her want to weep. Warm grey eyes went straight to hers, and he smiled, so Hermione dove back into the kitchen and started faffing with carrier bags. Conversation about everyone's journey sounded through the echoing space, and someone opened a bottle of wine. A glass was shoved into Hermione's hand, and she toasted with the rest of them, although her heart and brain were still racing. During a lull in the chatter, Blaise's voice sounded. So, where are we sleeping? I'd like to dump my bags off. Hermione's stomach did that sweep again, but less pleasantly this time. Well, Ginny said, there are 4 bedrooms, all upstairs and in each corner of the house. Rather brilliant placement, actually. Everyone has an ensuite and a view. 4. Hermione's ears zoned in on Draco's soft comment like a sauna. Her eyes went to his before she could help it, and she could feel the blood creeping up her neck. He cocked his head at her. Yeah, that was a mix-up, Ginny said. It was between this and another chalet. I thought this one had a loft with another sleeping area, but it was the other one. So, you 2. Her eyes darted between Draco and Hermione. We'll have to share? There was dead silence in the chalet. Or I could sleep on the couch, Hermione blurted, chancing another look at Draco. His brows lifted, and she glanced over at the sitting room. The sofas were all very short. More grouping of love seats, really. Granger, I doubt even a weaselette would fit in one of those, Draco said, walking over and leaning against the counter next to her. It will be fine, he said in a softer voice. I'll sleep on the floor, or you can build a wall of pillows between us. Hermione snorted out a small laugh. Okay, I guess. Excellent. Well, that's settled then. Blaise clapped his hand. I'm going up to get my things out of my case before they wrinkle. Maybe get a quickie in. He winked at Neville, who went bright red. Back down here in 34 cocktails? He wiggled his brows at everyone, and they all agreed, then began slogging up the steps. This is a Muggle property, and although the letting agency is visiting, they ask that we not do any obvious magic. If they have to do a memory modification, we lose our deposit. Hermione looked over at Draco, who had stayed against the counter next to her, arms crossed. Well, have pillars, eh? She said, smiling weakly. To protect my virtue from your ravenous advances, Granger. He gave her a signature Malfoy smirk, and she laughed, but then his expression became more sincere. I'm serious, though. I'd be happy to sleep on the floor. The management company will never detect a little cushioning charm. No, that's ridiculous, Hermione put out her hand. It's fine. He nudged her shoulder. Not like I'll get any sleep anyway. What with your snoring? Excuse me, I do not snore. Hermione pointed a finger in his face. Says you. But I slept on that bunk above you at that hostel in Paris, remember? He grinned down at her and caught her fingers, trapping it in his warm hands. Hermione swallowed. The smile slowly faded from his face, and his eyes grew intent on hers. A small crease appeared between his brows, and he breathed in as if about to speak. Oh, Draco Granger! Basil's dulcet tones drifted down. Get up here and draw straw, or you're getting the smallest room by default. Hermione started and snatched her hand away. Let her go, she said, a bit too brightly, before turning and heading for the stairs. The mountain. Hermione clicked into her skis and got into the singer-rider's line at the lift. It was so early that she barely had to wait before she was gliding up that mountain through the gorgeous Swiss landscape, all blinding mind punctuated by clusters of dark green fir and craggy peaks. Seeing it brought back bittersweet memories of her parents and the ski trips they'd used to take every year before the war and their move to Australia. They'd all been so close then, and now she wouldn't even be seeing them for Christmas. Christmas, which was the bloody day after tomorrow. God, another year almost done. Another year in which she had stayed running in place while her friends moved forwards. Harry and Ginny getting married this summer. Theo and Daphne likely making an announcement any day. Even Neville and Blaise coming together with the kind of perfect fit that felt like it would be something lasting. And her with her silly crush. Obsession, more like, for 5 years. Draco had come to work at the DMLE, 3 years after the war? And there had been the year of wariness that turned slowly to friendship, and after that, well, and now they were sharing a bed. In a gorgeous bedroom with a fireplace and a sheepskin bloody rug on a romantic ski chalet weekend. Hermione shook her head, promising herself that she'd make a real effort to try and find something of her own immediately following this trip. She'd be damned if she'd be the 17th wheel at the Weasleys' Christmas celebration again this time next year. She sighed, her breath making a cloud in the frigid air. At least last night had been fine, nerve-wracking, but fine. She'd kept a tight rein on her alcohol consumption, and after dinner and charades had gone straight to bed, claiming exhaustion after the journey. Of course, she hadn't really been tired at all, and had lain awake, ostensibly reading, but mostly fretting until she'd heard a tread outside the door an hour or so later. But her fake sleeping act had seemed to work, because after a short trip to the en-suite, Draco had slid into his side of the thankfully massive king bed without a word. Hermione had stayed rigidly still until his breathing had evened out, and after that she'd somehow drifted off herself, but not before casting a charm that would ensure she woke very early. She made it out the doors this morning before anyone else in the house, and likely the entire village had stirred. The creak of the overhead cable startled Hermione out of her thoughts. The lift car had approached the drop-off point. She disembarked, wobbling only a little bit as she skimmed over the traverse to the top of the downhill section. Pointing her skis over the lip of the run, she took a breath in and pushed off, determined to outrace her gloomy thoughts as best as she could. Hermione next found herself at the main lift queue just before lunch. After a few runs with Harry and Ginny, she was relieved to be on her own again. Let the daredevils have their cornies and moguls. She was happy with her gentler slopes. Navigating carefully to the single lane, she almost slipped on an icy bit when a familiar voice said, "Boo!" in her ear. Whipping around, she found herself in close proximity to a pair of grey eyes, twinkling from under sleek, pushed-up goggles. Draco was fresh, wind-blown, and stupidly handsome as he faced her over the Q-rope. Was it possible for a stomach to drop in panic and flip in delight at the same time? "Oh!" she said brilliantly. He was all in black, of course, his ski clothes somewhat chic and flattering. She frowned and looked him up and down. "How do you do that?" He tilted his head. She waved her pole. "Come over all smart and sleek when the rest of us looks like someone's taken an air pump and blown us up to twice our normal size." "I think you look lovely. You know how I feel about you in red." Hermione reached up and touched her red knit head, her mouth opening and closing. "Pardon," a voice came from behind her. "Are you joining the singer quay?" She turned to see a handsome, dark-haired man, obviously French from his accent, smiling at her. She smiled back and started to respond. "No, she's not." Draco ducked under the robe. Hermione gave him a startled look and then waved the Frenchman by. He smiled as he passed, and she made herself smile back again. This was what she was supposed to be doing, right? Flirting with people? Attempting connections? "If you're ready." Hermione looked up to see Draco staring at her, gesturing to the lane for multi-parties. She started and slid forward, and he snaked through the queue silently. "Just the two of you?" the lift operator asked as they approached the front. "Yes," Draco said. Hermione frowned at him, but he was looking off toward the singer-rider queue. They got in the seat and rode quietly for a bit. "How was your morning?" Hermione asked after a while. "Get some good runs in?" "Yes, I was up early, though obviously not as early as you." "You know me," Hermione tittered. "Wanted to be first on the mountain." "You must have been." He was still not quite looking at her. "And how did you sleep?" Hermione asked after a bit. "Well, I hope. No snoring to keep you awake." "Fine. You?" He flipped his goggles down. "Fine, fine." Hermione looked up at the sky and shivered. "God, it's gotten bloody cold, hasn't it?" The sun of the early morning had gone, replaced by steel-grey clouds and steady fall of soft white snow. She rubbed her hands. "I should get better gloves. I think the lining is ripped in these, but I always forget until I'm on the mountain and my hands are frozen." Draco looked over at her, put his goggles back up, and sighed. "Give me them." "What?" Hermione blinked. "Your hands. I can do wondrous warming charm. Perfected it when I was working that case in Moscow last winter." "Oh, shite." He swiftly removed his gloves and tucked them under his thigh. "These will have to come off too," he said, tugging at hers. Hermione didn't extend her hand. "Don't be shy." He pulled them practically into his laps and wrapped them in his own. His fingers were deliciously warm, and Hermione made a little noise at the sensation. His eyes flicked to hers and held for a moment. Then he looked down, and she saw him breathe in and out before he spoke. "It's not instantaneous," he finally said. "It works best if I sort of—" And he started rubbing his thumbs over her palms and up her fingers, warmth trailing wherever he touched. It felt so fucking good. "And your wrists are cold," he said softly, encircling first one, then the other with his finger and thumb. Hermione bit her lip. Hard. "You really must invest in better gloves." He looked up a bit severe. "The muggles have some ingenious technology in this area. We'll pick some up in the village." He finished by ghosting his thumb over her inner wrist, and Hermione couldn't stop her audible breath. His eyes went back to hers, their usual grey-dark, and Hermione suddenly felt a longing so intense that it was like a physical pull towards him. She realized she actually was leaning toward him, right as they went over the bump that signaled the disembarkation point ahead. "Shit!" she muttered, yanking her hands back and trying to tuck her gloves on. They were still wet, but the charm acted as an effective barrier. She felt Draco watching her, but she didn't look up, instead busying herself with poles and ski position. "Shall we?" His voice definitely sounded strained as they glided out of the chair. God, she was an idiot. Her reaction must have totally put him off. This is why she needed bloody distance. "Don't feel obligated to come down the blue slide with me," she tried for carefree and cheerful. "I want to come with you." "Really, Draco, I don't mind." Her words trailed off as he pushed off past her. "Come on, Granger," he called over his shoulder. Hermione took a second to admire the graceful line he cut down the mountain before she followed, trying to push away the embarrassment that trailed her down the hill. So she'd overreacted to a little platonic hand-holding. Maybe she could play it off as an episode of altitude sickness. Luckily, she was saved from having to do much damage control by the fact that almost the entire group from the house was clustered at the bottom of the run, yelling hellos as she and Draco approached. The ensuing debate over where to eat, lunch itself, and then a shuffle of groups afterwards meant that Hermione successfully avoided any more painfully awkward interactions. She only hoped it would stay that way. Après ski. Neville! Hermione called out as she stomped into the crowded bar at the foot of the resort. Coming into the hot, bright space from the dim chill of the mountain was almost disorienting, and she was glad to see someone familiar. Neville turned on his seat. "Hermione, hello, come sit," he said with an expensive hand movement. Hermione noticed as she approached that his face was quite flushed. "No, don't get up, I'll stand," she said, but he was already unfolding his legs and getting off the stool. "Absolutely not. Whoa!" He reached out and steadied himself, giving her a brilliant smile as he did so. "Bloody ski boots. What are you drinking?" "What are you drinking?" Hermione asked with an answering smile. Neville, despite his size, was a notorious lightweight. "Oh, they have these brilliant hot chocolates. Let me get you one," he flexed the bartender. "Sounds lovely." Hermione perched on her seat as Neville ordered, then watched the bartender mix several somethings into a glass mug, which he topped with dark, steaming chocolate and whipped cream, then placed it in front of her with a flourish. She thanked him and sipped gingerly, while Neville eyed her expectantly. "Bloody hell, this is strong," she sputtered. The bartender winked at her and pivoted away. "I thought so too at first, but it gets smoother as you go," Neville shouted over the nose of the bar. Hermione laughed and took a bigger sip. "When in Rome." "How was your day? Where's Blaise?" she asked. Grand. And he wanted one more go over off the back of the mountain." Neville glanced at his watch. "Should be here shortly, though. Daredevil, that one." He smiled indulgently. "How's that going?" Hermione took another drink of her chocolate. It really was delicious and very warming. "You two seem very happy." "We are." A dreamy look passed over Neville's features. "I'm happy for you. You deserve it." Hermione reached out to put her hands over his. "Thanks, love." Neville squinted at her. "So, what are we going to do about you?" "Me? What?" "We have to find you someone." "Do we?" "Yes. You're one of the best people I know, and I want to see you as happy as I am." Neville leaned forward and looked deeply into her eyes. Boy, he was really getting on toward pissed. Hermione regarded him as she slurped at her own drink. "I had thought, and Blaise said, but then—" He broke off as the bartender interrupted them to ask if they wanted another round. Hermione was surprised to look down and see her chocolate almost gone, and quickly agreed to one more. She then seized on the distraction to change the subject, and although Neville bit, gamely discussing that night's dinner plans, fondue, he also kept pointing out good-looking men around the bar. "Who, may I ask, is very handsome?" Blaise's faux-peeved voice suddenly came from behind them, accompanied by a wave of crisp outdoory scent. "Over there. I want him for Hermione," Neville said excitedly. Hermione peered over. "Oh, that's the guy from the lift queue. He's French." "Ooh la la. Well, get over there, Granger. He's fit as fuck. Also, I want your stool," Blaise said, nudging her. "No, get your own, or sit on Neville's lap." Hermione stuck her tongue out at Blaise, trying not to think about how her reluctance to go to talk to the Frenchman seemed inversely proportional to the avidity with which she kept scanning the bar entrance for white blonde hair. Fortunately, just then Ginny and Harry showed up with Daphne and Theo and ordered another round, which, along with the discussions of today's sport, provided a temporary distraction. "Where the hell's Draco?" Hermione blurted out after a bit, slurping the last of her third chocolate, and finally giving in to the question that had been nagging at her mind. Ginny, who was sitting next to her, looked at her owlishly. "You're pissed," she said. "Fuck off, I only had 2, Hermione protested. 3, Ginny said, pointing at her, "and they were strong. I only had 2, and I'm practically on my arse." "No matter," Harry said hurriedly, starting to pick up jackets and gloves. "It's time to get going anyway. The walk will do us all good." Hermione grudgingly shrugged into her anorak, but kept a narrowed eye on Ginny, who made a face at her. "Here, where is he, though?" Hermione asked as they trundled outside.
"It's fine, Granger,"
Theo said smoothly, holding the door open for her.
"He said he had an errand in the village."
"You're drooling because you're pissed,"
Gingy sing-songed.
"and because you love—"
"Okay, that's enough of that," Harry said, grabbing Ginny in the crook of her arm and towing her away, throwing a worried look over his shoulder at Hermione. "I'm fine, you're pissed," Hermione said, making a rude gesture at Ginny's back. Of course, then she immediately undermined her statement by slipping on the icy pavement. Instantly, a hand was under her elbow and an arm around her waist.
"Steady on, Granger."
Draco's voice was soft in her ear. She peered up to find him looking at her with a mixture of amusement and concern. Where the bloody hell had he come from? "Where the bloody hell did you come from?" She squinted at him.
"Did you have a nice time this afternoon and evening?"
he asked, moving around to her side and tucking her arm under his. Hermione made a little movement, and he looked down at her with a raised brow.
"No, you'd better stay here, Granger. It's icy, you're squiffy, and we've a ways to go."
Hermione opened her mouth to object and then frowned. "Fine," she wrinkled her nose at him, "but I'm not squiffy, and it's only because you're warm." He laughed and nodded.
"Enjoying some après ski warmers at the bar, I gather?"
"1 or 2. Where were you?" She was suddenly extremely peeved that he hadn't been there.
"Here, of course."
He waved his hand to encompass their charming surroundings, like a postcard of an Alpine village Christmas scene.
"Buying you gloves."
Hermione stopped them and looked up at him. "Oh, thank you," she said, touched. He kept her gaze for several beats, then inclined his head and made them walk again.
"Did the charm hold up this afternoon, though?"
"Yes, it was very good." The memory of him administering it flooded Hermione's drink-soaked mind, bringing with it many dangerous sensations.
"Excellent. And now you're quite cozy from all those drinks. The Weaslette said you had 3?
He smiled glinted down at her. "Tattletale," Hermione grumbled, looking daggers at Ginny's back.
No, don't frown. I'm not trying to scold. Oops, watch the curb."
He pulled her tighter against him as Hermione did a fast double step. "Damn, Neville, damn chocolates." "I'll have you know, I'm absolutely fine."
"Oh, of course you are. But just get you some dinner and maybe a strong cup of tea."
"Oh, dinner's fondue." Hermione perked up at the thought, beaming at Draco as they approached the lane to the villa. He murmured so softly Hermione could barely hear it, but it sounded like something about sitting on her left. "What?"
"Nothing. Here we are, home sweet home."
The scent.
"I cannot believe you didn't get that one."
Ginny sat up and glared at Theo. "That is a perfectly drawn dragon."
"You're joking. You must be joking. This looks like a horse drawn by a drunk 3-year-old.
Theo dangled a square of paper in front of Ginny's face.
No one would say it's a dragon. My sketching of Newt Scamander was dead-on masterpiece, though. And the fact that you didn't get that shows a worrying streak of face blindness."
"Hey, fuck you, nut."
Ginny V'd her fingers millimeters from Theo's face, and Hermione pitched sideways into Harry, laughing so hard she thought she might piss herself. She felt him pat her back as he himself whooped uncontrollably. Daphne's idea to mix everyone up so that there were no couples on teams for after-dinner board games had turned out unexpectedly brilliant, especially since the 2 most competitive people in the group, Theo and Ginny, had been paired. It also didn't hurt that the whole endeavor had been liberally soaked in alcohol, first kirsch with the fondue and then port afterwards. Hermione had moved beyond tipsy to completely pissed some time ago. She now gasped for breath and wiped tears from her eyes.
"All right, you two, break it up," they slurred. "Draco, my turn."
Neville cracked an almighty yawn.
"Hey, there's no way you can catch up. No way any of you can catch up. Duff and I are too far ahead. Everyone admit defeat and let's go to bed, for God's sake."
"I second that emotion,"
said Harry, getting up and holding a less than steady hand out to Ginny, who stood after a huffy snort at Theo. "Hope everyone's brought hangover draughts," Daphne said with a bright smile. Theo groaned. "Especially you," she prodded him. "You're the one who's been banging on about getting half a day in before we have to leave tomorrow." Hermione's eyes followed Draco as he got up and moved to the huge sitting-room window.
"I don't know." He peered through the dark glass. "It looks mad out there. The drifts are huge."
Hermione went to look too. The snow had stopped and started all day, but had become a real storm sometime after dinner and had been going steadily since. "Blimey," she said softly. The scene outdoor was almost surreal. Great white shapes lit by blue-white moonlight and giant flakes falling steadily over it all. Draco cut his eyes to her. "You going up?" "God, yes," Hermione yawned. She moved away from the window and towards the stairs. Draco didn't follow, so she turned. "Are you coming?" He was still looking out at the snowy tableau. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'll be right along." Hermione shivered as she exited the loo. It was bloody freezing in the room. A radiator against the wall clicked and whined, but it was clearly no match for the bitter cold that had settled over the chalet. She eyed the fireplace in the corner, then looking over her shoulder, went to her bag and furtively drew out her wand. He was pointing it at the grate and muttering an incantation when Draco pushed through the door. "Oh, you little rule breaker," he said, lounging in the doorway and crossing his arms. "Shut that!" Hermione glared at him. "You'll let the heat out." "What heat?" He chuckled and moved inside. "You know, it's refreshing seeing this delinquent side of you." He continued rummaging around in his bag, then ducking into the ensuite. He poked his head out a few seconds later. "I'm completely in support." Hermione paused in the act of climbing under the covers. "I see no problem with breaking rules when they're stupid," she said stoutly, "or if no one will know." Draco really laughed at this, the humor transforming his face in an extremely compelling way. "That's my Granger," he said, disappearing back into the bathroom. Hermione tried to ignore the warmth this remark introduced, but her drink-addled brain wouldn't let her, and she drifted on some very inappropriate fantasies for a moment until he reappeared. "God, it's bloody freezing," he said as he slid between the sheets. "That fire is barely making a dent." "I know." Hermione couldn't prevent a chatter of her teeth interrupted her words. She felt Draco flop towards her. "Do you want to come here?" he asked. "It's the only way to warm up." "Fuck, shite, bugger, wank." Hermione chanced a quick glance over at him from where she was laying on her back, attempting to will herself into forgetting he was there. He was irresistible, all silver ice and rumpled hair. "Come on," he patted the bed briskly. "I won't bite." He inclined his head. "But I may freeze to death if you don't come." She made a disgruntled noise, but slid over a few inches, and before she knew it, was being hauled against him, her face inches from the soft skin at the base of his throat. It was immediately warmer, and it smelled fucking heavenly. She took a discreet deep breath in. "That's better," he was saying, his voice almost a sigh. "You wouldn't want my death on your hands." The urge to just place her lips against his throat was so overwhelming that Hermione reared back and looked accusingly at him. "Why do you smell so good?" "What? Is it cologne?" "I don't wear cologne, no." A smile was starting to tug at his lips. "What then? I opened all your toiletries once and I couldn't find it." She ducked her head and inhaled at the base of his throat again. She could feel him shaking with silent laughter. "Granger, what are you doing? You smelled my toiletries. When?" "This summer, at that birthday party Pansy threw for you." "Ah, when you wore that sundress. The last time I saw you truly pissed. Well, what is it?" "What's what?" "This elusive scent." She squinted up at him. "I don't know. It's sort of minty but warm, rummy but brisk." He started laughing again. "I think you're rummy." She felt his arms tighten around her. "I'm determined to get to the bottom of this," she said, burying her face near the place where his jaw met his neck. "Yes," she said through a yawn. "I believe it's concentrated somewhere here." She tucked her head against him and breathed in deeply, suddenly very relaxed. "Do feel free to explore, Granger. Any help I can give," he murmured, and she felt him rest his chin on the top of her head. "It's just unfair," she said, yawning again. "Unfair to smell a certain way." His hand skimmed over her hair. Hermione's eyes were getting heavy, and she felt her grip on reality loosening. "For one person to smell so good," she breathed, sliding towards sleep. She couldn't make out his reply as she fell over this crevice into unconsciousness. But her last impression, or maybe it was the beginning of a dream, was of lips against her forehead and a soft hand stroking her back. To be continued. Thank you for listening to Après by scullymurphy. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or AO3.